to another one of these. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we're going to recreate another painting by another one of my all-time favorite artists. In fact, the artist that I was named after. My name is Michael, and my middle name is David. Michelangelo is today's artist. So I'm really excited to reproduce this small detail of my namesake's art here. This is a very small portion of one image of a much larger artwork called the Sistine Chapel. So I'm super excited to do. We're just going to do this small little portion of it because this is one of the largest artworks in art history. So we're certainly not going to spend the next 5 years or 4 years, because that's how long it took Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. So let's get right into it. I'm going to show you. This is the outline of the plan of attack for today. We're going to talk about how to get an image onto the canvas. Then we're going to apply some paint onto the canvas. We're going to talk a little bit about Michelangelo's biography, more specifically about the Sistine Chapel itself. And then we're going to do a little bit of underpainting, which is just sort of maybe painting over some of the outlines. And then we'll kind of do a little faux texture for the background. Work on the hands, because that's our foreground. Maybe finish the texture on the background if need be. Our finishing touches will probably be about an hour and a half from now, and then in about 2 hours we should be looking at them side by side. So if you're just watching this episode right at the beginning, you could certainly skip right to the end to see how it turned out, and you can join us back here if you like. Here's ways to support the channel. You can just like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Today's a bonus episode, so if you didn't have that notification bell hit, you would never have known it was happening until you just perchance happened to stumble upon it. Also, here's a couple of ways that you can, if you want to donate $1 to the channel, here's a couple of ways you can do it, including the super chat function. So if you see in where the chat is a little $sign, that's a way that you could support YouTubers like myself. Okay, so let's talk about getting this image onto the canvas. The first thing I want to let you know is that I did an outline of the image itself. Right, so here's the detail. Here's the outline that I did using my iPad Pro, using the Procreate app. I use that all the time I'm drawing a graphic novel using that app on that tool, that tablet. So let's just show you where you can find that. Oh, I should also mention, here's the private Facebook group just for people like yourself. Join the group, upload a version of today's painting that you made or anything else you're working on. Next weekend, this time, same place, I'm going to go through everything and give people feedback on all the great art that they've been working on lately. So I encourage you to do that. Here is a Dropbox folder. This is where you're going to find the outline, as well as hundreds, literally hundreds of other outlines and other paintings that we've already done. This is episode 197 painting episode that we've done. I did 50 episodes on drawing and on photography beyond earlier that. That's why there's 300 episodes of live streams. Anyway, in here you'll see all of these folders. The top folders are most basic, most simple episodes, and then the more complex ones are numbered as opposed to lettered. So some are more complex than others. Today's probably mid-range. I wouldn't say it's going to be that complex. Here we are, 117 Michelangelo. And then you're going to see these 3 files inside there. Once you download them, you can print it off on, I just have a inkjet printer here at home, print it off on regular paper, and you're ready to go, and that's going to be how we begin. Now, obviously, if you want to draw this, it's a little bit more complex. I did, again, teach an entire course on how to draw, and I think we did 2 or maybe even 3 episodes on drawing hands. So you could recreate this drawing these exact hands, or you could recreate it drawing your own hands, or your partner's hands, your children's hands. You could have so much fun with this if you learn how to draw. Anyway, so let's talk about how to get this onto the canvas. So I'm going to play a video here because I've already pre-recorded the transfer process. Let's see if it plays. So here I'm using just a regular 9x12 sized canvas board. I bought these off of Amazon. I'm not the biggest fan of them, but the ones that I do like are listed in the description below. Of course, you can get them from the dollar store, but these ones are $2 and they're 5 times better than the $1 ones at the dollar store. I'm going to use carbon paper to do the transfer process. And you can see one side's maybe a little bit shinier than the other, although this specific sheet I've used many, many times. That's the great thing. You can get a pack of like 10 of these sheets, and then you can use them over and over and do like 100 episodes just on a pack of 10, right? Because you can at least get 10 images out of each sheet. So I'm going over most of the lines, at least in the hands. Because again, hands are pretty tricky for most people. And I did do a few little lines in the background. Most of that's just going to get painted over, so it's just a little bit make work exercise for myself. You can see that one of the reasons why that the outline that I did is so faint is because that carbon paper has been used so many times that it starts to lose its ability to transfer very well. So I think it might have been after I did that one, I just tossed the transfer paper, the carbon paper. Anyway, I'm gonna save this. Actually, maybe let's just keep it out here. I might use it again just to refer to. That's why it's helpful to even just print it out and just sketch from it. I find it's kind of a little bit more difficult to sketch from looking at a computer screen, right? Okay, so now that we've got that done, let's talk about how to get the painting started here. So the next step is applying some paint, or first layer of paint, to the canvas, and that's called Imprimatura. And this entire technique is really, it didn't begin during the Renaissance, but it certainly popularized during the Renaissance. This idea of prepping a surface before you begin becomes more and more important because more and more artists are painting on not really canvas, but panels, like wooden panels. Now, I should also mention that today's painting is a fresco. It was painted on a ceiling, so actually a very different process than the one we're going to paint today, which I'm just now thinking like, oh, I wonder if there's a way to paint it like a fresco. I hadn't thought about it, so let me just think in the back of my mind about that. So here's the paints that I'm going to be using, because often, you'll hear me refer to, I'm going to now use a little bit of warm red or cool blue. People are like, what does that mean? Right? I did a whole course, 5 episodes, showing the basics of how to paint using this very basic split primary system. And I'm not the person who invented it. It's been around for hundreds of years, but I think it makes the most sense for anyone who wants to learn how to paint. Anyway, here's what those colors are. I'm not sponsored by the brand Amsterdam, or Royal Talons is their larger parent company, but I just find they work really well and they're pretty cheap, right? Here's other brands. Golden, this is a much more professional grade of paint, and these are the colors I suggest you use if you want to use Golden. Liquitex, I think Liquitex makes sort of a cheaper brand and a higher quality brand, so this is the paints that I would use for them. Winsor & Newton is also a major brand, bigger in Europe than here in North America. Artist Loft, this is the brand owned by Michael's Art Supply, that chain of stores across the United States and Canada. Buzz is pretty big here in Canada. Peebo, I think that's more of a European brand, although you can buy them here in Canada. Holbein and Daler-Rowney are also pretty well-known brands of paint. Okay, so let's get this painting started. Typically what I like to do is to paint, look at this, I got a new box here. This is the box that my wife's hair dryer came in, And I just spray painted it black like this. Oh, it's kind of nice. Because the other one has fallen off the table a few times and broken, and this one will, I'm sure, fall off the table a few times and break, but it's nice to have one that hasn't broken just yet. So I'm going to put about as much paint on there as I put on my toothbrush, and I'm going to now put a little bit of water in here. How much water is that? That's like maybe a spoonful or two tablespoons of water. Okay, and then it's going to stir this up. And that should be enough to cover this whole canvas. Basically, what I'm doing here is just staining the surface. And this is a technique artists have used all the time. Now, I've said many times before, if you were to show this to another artist and tell them you're using this warm yellow, they would think you're insane, and they would say, why are you doing that? What insane person taught you to do this? You're like, oh, some guy off of YouTube. And they're like, stop watching him, he's an idiot. So I just always want to preface that this is a bit of something very specific to my own interests in color theory. But there's a few things. You certainly don't have to use yellow. The traditional route would be to use maybe a rusty red color, and I think that would get you kind of like a rusty brown, again, diluted like this, because you don't want it to be too dark. Really, one of the things that artists use this for often is for getting a skin tone down to start, and also to kind of get a mid-range value. Remember we did a whole episode on value. That was our 5th of 5 episodes on Introduction to Painting. I think it was the 5th one, wasn't it? I can't. It's the 4th or 5th one. And this yellow, while it appears quite bright, is kind of a mid-range value. It's certainly not white like a canvas. Like this is what the white used to look like, but it's also not black, right? So it's a little bit closer in value to white as opposed to black, but it gives us something a little bit in between. And that way I can be brightening and I can be darkening my canvas rather than just always getting darker or always getting brighter. There's so many, like that's one, me just talking about that is really like, oh, I don't think I even put that in the first video where I talk about why I do this. Because there's so many different reasons to do some kind of imprimatura on your canvas to get the whole thing started. Okay. I did a lot of work in the studio cleaning and moving things around over the past few days. I'm sure it doesn't even any of it show up on camera at all, but there used to be a big table full of clutter behind me. I threw the table out yesterday. I've been wanting to do that for a couple of years now and finally decided to take action, and that's so satisfying. Anybody who knows what it's like to procrastinate endlessly on something knows how satisfying it ultimately is when you finally take action on it. Okay, I'm just going to get these paints out of my box here. I don't know about this flap. I feel like I've got way more paints out than I need. There's a number of the same tubes. Anyway. Okay, so we've got this applied on here, and I just want to take a look at the original here for a moment, because I think what I'm going to do before I even progress further is to try to just get a little bit of the texture on the background. So this kind of grayish, there's almost a little bit of purple in here, purple and yellows. But I'm not going to do all of it, but I think I just want to get a little bit of that on here. I'm just going to, they'll speed things up while this canvas is drying, or while we're talking about Michelangelo's Biography, this can start drawing. Okay, so I'm going to mute the audio for just about 15 seconds here. Lots of pretty funny comments in the chat here. Where was I reading here? Oh, more keep coming in here. Carol says, I'm ready to paint, but I'm not sure if I will do so or just enjoy the evening with a glass of wine. That sounds great. And she says, I tend to clean out my brush in my coffee cup and I miss the mark on the water. Yes, that's why I used to also do the same thing. I used to have a coffee cup and my cup of water in a coffee cup. And I can't tell you how many times I would wash my brush in my teacup, and then, 10 minutes later, you're like, oh, I taste a little bit of ultramarine blue and little side notes of magenta. So I had to kind of make a decision to have a clear cup here, so when that water changes color, because you get into the act of painting and you're just doing things and then you're like, what have I done? Okay, so let's get some paint on the canvas, or on the palette here. So actually I have this one. I got like 4 tubes of this cold blue that are almost empty. So rather than opening a new one, I gotta use the ones I got here. Now I'm not sure, just off the top of my hand, top of my hand. I guess maybe because we're painting 2 hands today. That's a funny little slip. Off the top of my head. Although maybe off the top of my hand too. I don't know what colors I'm going to be using. So that's why I kind of put, a little bit of paint on here. And that way if I need more, I can always put more on there, but I'm not going to end up wasting too much paint. And I think I mentioned previously that one of the things that I've started doing at the end of every episode is just putting all of my extra paint onto this painting by Jay DeFeo that we began back in like November. She worked on this painting for, I don't know, like a decade, constantly applying more and more paint to it. So that's sort of my goal, is I'm going to use that canvas and just load it up with paint. At the end of every paint session, I'm just going to take inspiration from that incredible artist and follow her lead and apply more and more paint to that and just see how thick it eventually gets. I mean, I wish I had been thinking about that a few years ago. It would be, I could probably stand on it like a ladder. Okay. So there's my paint on the canvas, or the palette. Let's just think about the color that I want here. So I got this warm yellow as my Imprimatura, because it gives it nice gold, glowing quality. So obviously we're going to put some kind of white over top of it, but I want to just obliterate it with white. I want to have a little bit of this purpley quality here, because I think these are clouds in behind. Again, we're going to take a look at the painting. We'll zoom out and take a look at it shortly here, but I just want to get this started. So maybe let's put these side by side. So what I'll probably do, I'm going to try to mix a bit of a purple, a muted purple, So, I'm going to mix... This is going to give me my brightest purple. If I mix these two, like this red and this blue together, I'm going to get a really brownish purple. So I think I'm going to go for something a little bit more saturated, and then mute it down just by adding some white to it and then some matte medium. So I'm not going to need to mix much of it because it's going to be a pretty subtle effect. All right, so let's mix these two together. My daughter just went to bed, and I don't know if you can hear her making... She's having a party in her crib. Lots of sounds. Okay, oops, let's get this here. So I just mixed that paint, and you could use a different paintbrush. I'm just going to wipe this paint off, not clean it completely, and then I'm just going to mix it into my white here. I was just about to just take my brush and do that, but if, for instance, this got too purple, well, what am I going to do? I could add another half tube of the white paint to lighten it back up, to tint it back up. But what am I going to use all of that paint for, right? So you always want to just be a little bit careful when you're darkening a color, because that color is going to get dark really quick. That color is, there's a bit of a, it's a kind of gray. This right now is very purpley. I mean, it's very subtle. What I'm kind of counting on happening, as opposed to just mixing a gray right now, and maybe I'll do, you know, another little bit when we get to the background portion of today's episode. But I'm kind of counting on this purple. I'm not sure, it looks, it's maybe a little bit bright. What's my... I'm counting on the warm yellow to mix a little bit with this, and to mute this, the color intensity down. So let's take a bit more yellow. Oh, see, I might have just gone a little bit far because I was being impatient. I don't know. So yeah, you know, because I look on the screen there and it looks much lighter, and then I look here, I'm like, whoa, what have I done? But so now I'm putting, this is matte medium. Matte medium is just clear paint. There's no pigment in it. It's exactly what's inside of all of these colors, except it doesn't have the powdered color in it, right? So that's dark. Well, let's just go with it. I could mix another version, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm probably going to be regretting this in 2 minutes. I also just want to make sure that it's transparent enough that I don't obliterate the hands with this layer of paint. Yeah, that's okay. Maybe instead of, yeah, you know, let's just do it. Let's just, I'm always telling people just to embrace it and go with it, so I always have to remember to follow my own advice. Again, the only thing that is most concerning to me is that the hands remain somewhat visible. So I gotta get this covered as quickly as possible, and then I'm gonna kind of rub a little bit off. So the hands are kind of disappeared a little bit. As it dries, it's going to get a little bit more transparent. That's for sure, but you never want to just depend on it. It's always easier just to make things a little bit more transparent, and if you want it to be a little bit darker, is to just do another layer, right? That's a kind of a weird color that I got here. This purple over top of the yellow. I mean, they're complementary colors, which means they're exactly the opposite from one another on the color wheel. So what I was hoping, and we've got a little bit of that happening here, is that they kind of cancel each other out. Right? Because essentially what we've done is we painted the warm yellow on top of the white canvas, and then we took purple with a little bit of white in it, and we just applied it directly over top of this. So you could see what it's sort of doing is if we paint these two colors or mix them together, we're going to get a kind of a gray. So that's why I chose purple, not only because I kind of see it in there, but I thought of it kind of an interesting way to neutralize the warm yellow without obliterating it. Not neutralize it, but to literally complement it, right? One of the things you often see, let's say in fashion or like sports teams, for instance, often use complementary colors that are opposite from one another on the color wheel, because they usually complement each other pretty well. Okay, so now I will let that dry. That is, I probably wanted to do this a little bit more subtle than I actually did. Because, you know, if I look at this now, some people are going to be like, this guy is crazy. But, you know, what I've kind of got a little bit of this color in here. So later on, I'm going to lighten by just adding like some more white in here. So it's sort of like I'm kind of working the opposite, because these are two figures in the clouds. This is God touching man's hand and giving him life, and so this is a kind of a cloud in the sky. So it's almost like I'm painting the clouds, and then I'm going to paint the sky around the clouds, if that makes any sense. So it's kind of a backwards way of working. So, but I don't mind that. I'm kind of, it's always fun just to, it's like, oh, here's a new challenge for myself. Okay. Okay, so we'll let this dry. In fact, I'm just going to hit it with the blow dryer to speed that process up, because it's still quite shiny, and I just want to make sure that it's nice and ready to go. So just going to give me a Okay. So let's talk about Michelangelo. Okay. So Michelangelo's born in 1475 and dies at age 88 in 1564, right? So he's born in Florence, or the Republic of Florence, because back then, a lot of the world was in these small, like city-states, especially in Europe, where, you know, you're talking a period of time where people rarely traveled more than maybe 100 kilometers, or what's that, about 80 miles or something, away from their birthplace. Like, you know, traveling across the ocean, that was a massive major ordeal, right? Or to go to Africa, or to go, you know, to England if you were in France. Like, even though it's just across the channel, like those things were mostly reserved for like invading armies, right? So not a particularly common thing. And also these city-states were very powerful, and Florence was probably the most powerful in the region. It was a very wealthy area, and one of the things that I strongly recommend everybody do is to watch this absolutely excellent documentary called The Medicis, the Godfathers of the Renaissance. I think this was a PBS documentary that came out maybe a decade ago. I mean, just absolutely incredible. Really, like, it's a lot of fun, and also just very enlightening as to the history of not just Michelangelo and Leonardo and Raphael, and not Donatello. He wasn't part of, even though he's a Ninja Turtle, was not a part of this group. He came prior to them, but also just like the church, really, the Catholic Church and its role, and the Medicis were this very powerful banking family that lent money to the church, and we'll talk about some of the stories from there, because it's just you can't even believe it's right out of Game of Thrones. Like, Game of Thrones ripped off a lot of stuff from actual human history that you don't even believe. You're just like, that's just crazy. Anyway, so he's born in Florence, and his father was a banker, but there was like financial troubles, and his mother died when he was very young, and so he is sort of sent away to live with his I think it was his uncle. Is there something it says in here, or his aunt? After his mom dies, lived with. So he's like an orphan at a very early age, and yet he's also kind of showing some promise when it comes to art, and really more specifically into sculpture. So he sort of gets at this point in time, there wasn't really even schools the way we think of them today, especially not art school. You have the system at the time where you have a master and apprentice kind of program, and you have all of, like, every great artist was like a little mini factory. And so you'd have a great artist who would have a number of people working under him, because again, whether we agree with it or not, that was mostly men that had this role, right? And these masters might have sort of tiers of people. You might have someone that 2 or 3 people that were sort of right below you, that were very close to kind of graduating on to forming their own school, right? Because you'll hear things like the school of Michelangelo, the school of Leonardo, the school of Raphael, etc. So you would have like these kind of high apprentices that would do a lot of the work for an artist, and then the artist would kind of put the finishing touches on things. That's why it can be really hard to discern who did what. You might see like there's confusion as to the attribution of certain major artworks. Like one of the ones we'll eventually get around to in August, the Salvator Mundi, attributed to Leonardo, but is it by someone in Leonardo's school and just finished by Leonardo, or did Leonardo even touch it at all? Who knows, right? Anyway, so Michelangelo sort of is working his way up through an apprenticeship program, and is basically kind of adopted by the Medici family. And again, you got to watch that documentary because it's so cool. It talks about like a dinner table where you have Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Machiavelli, and Galileo sitting around at a dinner table. Like, I mean, that is like, can you imagine being a fly on the wall? Now, at this time, Michelangelo is probably the youngest of that group, so he's maybe like 10 or 12 years old, just sort of watching. You know, can you imagine sitting at a dinner table hearing a political debate between Galileo, Machiavelli, and Leonardo da Vinci? Like, what? That just blows my mind. So anyway, this is the kind of and not only that, we're talking a period of time during when the Medici's are around, where the end of the quote-unquote medieval ages, which are sort of according to the prevailing, the way we think of the medieval is there's just a bunch of people with basically cavemen, right? It wasn't like there was no intellectual curiosity going on. But because the Medici family was quite wealthy, and they're bringing in these different people, very smart people from various different disciplines, they're kind of this very liberal enclave surrounded by a lot of other warring factions, and this really fosters questioning of not only science and physics and mathematics, but also art and eventually politics. And we know what happens to Galileo. Galileo gets arrested and has to repudiate everything he's done because he says the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. In fact, the Earth is just one thing revolving around the sun, and the sun is just one thing in the whole cosmos, right? But what else do I want to say here? Because I want to start painting. Let's just zip ahead here. So Michelangelo becomes really interested in sculpture, and one of the early things that he sculpts is the Pietà. So he is in his early 20s when he makes this artwork, which is in the Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica. St. Peter's Basilica, by the way, was also largely not entirely designed by Michelangelo, but Michelangelo basically finished it. And I guess it was the construction finished after he died, but if you haven't been to the Vatican and toured the Vatican museums, Pietà is one of the most gorgeous sculptures you'll ever see. It'll blow your mind. So, boom, that is like, the Beatles releasing Help, right? Or, a hit single that just like immediately takes over. All of a sudden people are like, whoa, who's this kid? Like, there's a new king in town. Like, and then he follows that up about another 5 years later with the David, right? My middle name, named after David here. And again, this is in Florence. You got to go see that. This is the main attraction, probably, besides the Uffizi Gallery in Florence and a separate museum. Absolutely incredible sculpture, and it's about like 3 times the size of a normal person, so you're kind of standing up and looking up at it. And again, this is like Sgt. Pepper's album comes out, and everyone's like, this is incredible. So by the time he's 30 years old, we're just sort of skipping over a lot of the other things that he's done. So here's some of his early sculptures. He did do a little bit of painting, which would have been not surprising as part of an education for an artist working in any studio. There would be a little bit of painting going on the side. But it certainly wasn't his forte, right? So at this time, Michelangelo is, the talk of Rome, right? He's now kind of moving outside of this powerful Florence, and the Pope is like, you're going to come and work for me directly. Get your butt over here. Bring your tools, right? Interestingly enough, though, Michelangelo gets the commission to do the tomb of the Pope who was in power at the time, which is, that's the commission of commissions. That is the most prestigious thing that an artist could possibly be given, right? And this is a task that takes him ultimately about 40 years to do. And the Pope is still very much alive at this time, right? It's like the pharaohs building the pyramids, right? But you can imagine what happens when like a 30-year-old kid moves to town, gets the biggest commission of all. A lot of other people start taking notice. And where does it say here? Bramante, who is kind of an average artist and an architect who is also doing some work on St. Peter's Basilica, becomes pretty outraged. You know, he's an older guy, and he's like, what insanity did the Pope give this kid the best job of all? I've been here working my butt off for a couple decades. This is outrageous. So he comes up with a plan to convince the Pope to give Michelangelo a huge painting commission, right? Because this tomb is a sculpture, right? And this actually exists. You can go visit it. Parts of it are incomplete or complete. That's a whole other discussion. But so Bramante is like, let's see what happens if the Pope gives Michelangelo the commission to paint the Sistine Chapel, which at the time was sort of just a meeting place for the various people in the church. At one point, it was a barn, right? So let's see. By the way, if you're just sort of, you know, the Vatican is a country onto itself that is located inside Rome, right? So here's Italy. There's Florence, so he's moved down here. That would have been a big move to come all the way down here. And we zoom in, and here, the Vatican is this, you know, it's about the size of a couple baseball fields, or probably like 5 or 6 baseball fields together here. And inside you have the Vatican itself, and then the Sistine Chapel is directly connected to St. Peter's Basilica itself, right? So Bramante is like, because I bet you what's going to happen is Michelangelo is going to go in, and he's going to start painting this Sistine Chapel, which is important because the Pope wants to make it kind of a more functional part of the church. And this is what it looked like at the time. It had this sort of blue sky with little yellow stars all over it. And so Michelangelo's commission actually is to paint these triangular pieces, because they're sort of just blank, or I don't know what, they're black or something. So that's the original commission. And Bramante thinks, okay, if Michelangelo fails at this, he's now been called to Rome, what would happen if he blows it? Then he's probably also going to get kicked off the commission to do the tomb. And guess who will be standing there in line ready to assist the Pope in his greatest time of need? Bramante. But Michelangelo isn't one just to kind of lay down from a challenge. He not only says, okay, sure, I'll paint that, but he decides, not only that, I'm also going to paint the whole ceiling. I'm just going to do the whole thing. And the Pope is like, okay, sure, that sounds great. Sure. And Bramante is sort of like, okay, yeah, let's just see how this works out, right? So there's this behind, and all of this is archived in letters. Like Michelangelo's life, for someone who was born 546 years ago, tomorrow is his birthday, 546th birthday. For someone who lived that long ago, it's amazing how much information, like we have the letters and we have poems by Michelangelo. Michelangelo was the first artist in the Western world to have not only one, but 2 biographies written about him while he was alive. You know, it's now not uncommon to go to your bookstore and see a biography on Barack Obama or Keith Richards or something. At the time, that was really weird. Like, to write a book about someone who's alive, again, kings and queens, popes, those kind of things, of course. Yeah, they had books written about them when they're 5 years old. But for an artist to have their biography written at that time, that's pretty weird, right? You know, it's like today, you know, there's very rarely stamps that are made of living people, right? That's usually reserved for like major, you know, people changing the world or something, right? So Michelangelo gets this commission, he starts making this painting, and boy, oh boy, does he pull this thing off, right? This is what the Sistine Chapel, so here's some sketches that he did for the Sistine Chapel, and it's just an absolute marvel, right? So there's the 12 apostles, let me see. Oh, let me just, these are, just while we're scrolling through it, this is a drawing by Michelangelo showing how he did it. So he's standing on this gigantic scaffold. If you've ever been to the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling itself is about the size of a basketball court, which may sound big or small to you depending on the way you think of it. Basketball court's about 500 square meters, which is, you know, to sprint all the way across takes about 4 or 5 seconds, right? And he's on the Sistine Chapel's quite high too, so it's maybe 3 stories high, and he's on this scaffold standing on the top, painting above his head for 4 years, right? And here he also made, this is a painting of God in the act of creation, which some people say is sort of trying, you know, to Michelangelo doing a little bit of a self-portrait of himself trying to execute this painting. Let me see. I think there's another image here. Okay, so here's your 12 apostles, right, in these triangular spaces. And then inside here you have the creation. You also have all these other small panels which talk about the genealogy of Christ, like, you know, the who came first and then second, and, you know, Adam begot whatever, and blah 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 blah. And so Michelangelo transformed this commission from just being a fairly minor decoration of the apostles into this whole history of the Bible, right? So again, there's over 300 figures in this entire piece, when originally there were supposed to be 12. So talk about somebody going above and beyond what is asked about them. I just think that is just wild. Let's see. There's there's a few other Michelangelo paintings I want to do, so I think I might just I might end here. Maybe I think just one other thing that we just have to mention is The Agony and the Ecstasy, which was a book that was turned into a film starring Charlton Heston, which is an excellent movie. It's a movie of its time, but is highly recommended. I love these early movies, like, what's the one starring Kirk Douglas about Vincent van Gogh is the... That's going to drive me crazy now. But you got to... This is another movie. Great, great movie. It also... Because one of the great things this movie shows is the tension between Michelangelo and the Pope, and again, all of this is recorded in letters back and forth, and Michelangelo not really being the happiest about giving this commission, being a sculptor sent to Rome, which is very exciting, but then the commission he gets is not the one that he wants, but you gotta, when the Pope tells you to do something, you're gonna do it. Irving Stone is the one who wrote the book. I haven't read the book, but I think it won much of awards. It was a pretty successful book, obviously. Anyway, let's get into the painting here, because I could just talk about this stuff forever. Okay, so what we want to do is I want to start maybe doing a little bit of outlining if I think I need that, and so that's what our underpainting process is. You know, I can still see the hands a little bit through here. It's not as visible, but I can still see some details. Like, I'm a little bit bummed that I've lost two of these fingers. I think was there one finger here, but you know, it's not. Personally, I'm not worried about that. I could see someone else who hasn't taken my drawing class feel a little bit out of water here, so maybe that's why you might want to use a little bit more matte medium just to make this a little bit thinner than what I've got, so you see a little bit more of your pencil lines. Or you could just press a little bit harder when you do your outlines. Okay, so let's look at the original and just think, you know, if we look here, one of the features is there's a lot of outlining that takes place. Now, that's I'm sure it's because this was done as a fresco. And is it worth talk? Okay, so painting a fresco is a lot like making a stained glass window. You're often making things in little sections, and what you're doing is applying wet plaster to the wall and then quickly painting over the wet plaster or into the plaster. And it's a time-consuming process that is both, you know, labor-intensive, and also once that wet plaster is on the wall, you got to work quickly, right? So it's sort of like there's, you know, sometimes like when I'm painting here where things are really kind of slow and it's like, okay, we've got 15 seconds before this paint dries. We got to do whatever we can before it seizes up. So almost like fresco painting is in some ways, I haven't thought about this at all before, but in some ways a lot like painting with acrylics, as opposed to painting with oil paints, which can stay open or wet for months, depending on how you set everything up, right? But essentially these outlines sort of act as like you would paint the background as a separate kind of like a puzzle piece, and then you paint the hands as a separate puzzle piece, right? So you're kind of like little chunks that you're doing. And so you could probably, like this here, I suspect would be a different area where, let's say you paint this and it's all wet, and so you're breaking a larger image up into smaller chunks in order to get it done. And another way, so maybe just another quick tiny detour, is that you'd have your apprentices. So Michelangelo would make all these sketches. We saw his sketches that he did very briefly. And then he would get one of his apprentices to enlarge those sketches to make them big, right? These figures are probably twice the size of a regular human being, at least this image right here, because you got to be able to see them when you're standing 3 floors down looking up at the ceiling, right? So if they're life size, they'd just be they'd look all jumbled up. What am I looking at? So they have to be enlarged, and they're enlarged on giant pieces of paper that are called cartoons, right? That's the origin of the word cartoon, because a cartoon is very simplified outlined image, just like a comic book cartoon, a Saturday morning cartoon, Bugs Bunny, dark outlines, solid colors inside. That's what we have here. So you have these big pieces of paper with very simple outlines on it, and then they're often poked little holes along those lines, and then held up onto the wall, and then like a sock filled with powder, you're banging onto that paper, and you peel the paper off, and you've got a little dotted line all over the wall. Or you might use like a tool to sort of chisel along that line. Or after the dotted line is there, you again carve right into it to make it really obvious as to where the wet plaster goes and where the other area that you're not painting on goes. Anyway, I love all this stuff, so I could talk about it forever, but let's start painting. So let's do a brief little bit of outlining here. And we're just going to make a kind of a dark color, a generic dark color. So we'll just use our warm red and our warm blue. And this is going to give us a really dark brownish purple, right? So this is, this is the difference. Remember I said, here's a purple that we can make, and this is what happens when we make this purple. If we mix this red, this cool red, and warm blue together, we get this very vibrant purple. We mix this warm red and cool blue together, this is the purple we get. Not quite the purple you might want, right? Now I'm going to take some cool yellow, mix this in. And currently this color is very brown looking. So I can deduce to myself, why is it so brown looking? It means there's a lot more red in here. So I need to balance that out. If I want it to go gray, or a really dark gray, I need to add more blue to it, because right now the color is sort of off here, and we're going to pull it into the middle. There we go. And if it starts going to blue, then we put a little bit of red. Again, the yellow as well, because that color is sort of actually a little bit down here. If we just mix those colors down here, the yellow pulls it into the center, into the neutral core here. Okay, and again, we're going to paint over a lot of this, but maybe if some of this shows through, that can be cool too. We could use a Posca pen to do some outlining, or just use the same color, or fluorescent yellow if you like later on. It's up to you. Let's look at this here. Napoleon Bonaparte says, is he painting in oil or acrylic? If you're talking to me, I'm painting in acrylic. If you're talking about Michelangelo, he's painting in a tempera, a fresco material. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly go over top of my outlines here. Some people might feel compelled to use a Sharpie or something. That would be probably a very bad idea, because it's going to just totally compromise your entire painting. Sharpie does not behave very well. It's for making like garage sale signs and stuff, for labeling boxes that go in your garage, but not for making art that you might intend to last a few months, because it's gonna resist paint on top of it. It's gonna yellow, or not yellow, it's gonna actually go kind of green or purpley. Which, you know, I guess if that's what you want, there's nothing wrong with that. But also another thing with Sharpies is that they're not light fast, meaning that over time, very quickly, they change color. Again, they'll go kind of purple or green, depending on the brand. Cheaper brands will probably change color even faster. Okay, that's probably enough. And there might be a few things that I'll do later on. Obviously, we're gonna paint all that, but I just want to get that out. And so this is the hand of man, quote unquote man, and this is the hand of God. Right? And the hand of God reaching out to touch the limp hand of man, who is not quite fully formed, that doesn't have life yet, and here God is reaching out to activate him, to turn the switch, fill him with life. And the rest, they say, is history. Depending on who you ask, I guess. Some people would say this is definitely not history. But according to a billion or so people around the world, this is a kind of a history, right? Okay. So again, I've lost a little bit of the detail. As long as I can sort of just get to this stage, then I'm confident in my own ability to kind of find my way back into some of these details. You could potentially do this before you even paint the the Imprimatura, or even put the white down, but you may end up having to do this again after that layer anyway. That's why you just always want to exercise a level of caution before you apply any color that's going to be really kind of opaque. And I am taking maybe a little bit longer when I've done some of these under paintings before. Sometimes I just zip around, but really this is all we have, is just some hands on here. So it sort of behooves me to be just a little bit more careful than I have and take my time and do a reasonable job of this step. I'm not worried about it kind of getting a little globby and all that kind of stuff. This is more just compositionally, am I going to be able to see the hand later on? Right, as you can see why it can be kind of helpful to have something like this around, so that if you do lose some of those lines, you're like, oh, okay, well, that shows up here. Oh, I'm missing this little bit. Oh, let's just add that little fellow there. Okay. So, let's take a look at where we are at this stage. And I like that Pascal says, like, subscribe. That's awesome. You guys are so cool. Wow, so many. Whoa, lots of comments here. Wow, okay, there's so many. I don't even know where to start here. People wishing prayers for Ukraine. I'm talking about the world today. By the way, there's going to be, again, another good reason to hit that notification bell is I'm going to be doing an episode, or 2 episodes relating to, actually 3 episodes relating to what's going on in the news today. So I'll just tease that out right now, and just to help encourage people to subscribe and everything, because I think those are going to be a lot of fun, and we can sort of talk about some things going on. I try not to talk about that in these classes because I sort of want this to be a bit of a refuge from all of the chaos going on in the world, and if people want to talk about that, they can watch those episodes and we can chat all about it and vent, and then we can come back to here and have something completely separate from the rest of the news. Pascal says, Bramante is average? I thought I was average. If he's average, I'm nothing. Bramante the saboteur, says Sandra. Pascal, how do you even paint a ceiling? Good question. Like, can you imagine how difficult that would be? Either standing up and painting for hours like that. Like, just if you've ever tried to paint a ceiling, let's say in a bathroom, which I've done once, like, after 5 minutes, you're like, whoa, okay, I gotta take a break. Whoa, how are we gonna do? And you know, that's if you're using, let's say, a roller and you're trying to do that. If you're standing there with your hand over your head, at times he's laying on his back painting, and it's really hard to do because how do you know, like, we're talking, if you're painting, let's say, one of the faces of one of these disciples, it's like that big. So, and if it's that far from your face, You have to climb all the way down the scaffold. Look at it. Ah, oh, okay, I messed it up. I gotta climb back up and work on it again. It's just nuts, right? So, okay. Let's move on here. I'll try to answer all these questions. So now that we've got our Imprimatura, which is our yellow layer, we've mixed this kind of purple layer on top of it, and then we did some underpainting. The next step here is to start painting a little bit more in the background. Let's try to give it a little bit more of the flavor and the texture that we see in the original. So let's take a look here and think about how we can approach this and what we've already got. So, I mean, I've kind of got this color right here. Maybe here. I'm probably still going to do a little bit of something on here just to, you know, we've got these kind of striations of, you know, this is probably the trowel that you know, that's caused these curving lines here. Do we want to do that? That would be pretty tricky. And then you've got paintbrush strokes going over top of it. That's a lot, maybe more work than I think we need to do. Probably most people could care less about that kind of stuff. And then, is that lightning bolts or just cracks? I don't know. Again, you're painting on plaster. It's not like the most stable surface ever, right? Especially plaster, it's way high up on an old building that is shifting and moving. We could try to get a little bit of that in. So maybe let's mix kind of a white. We're gonna apply with some kind of a glaze-like process. But I think we'll still use our matte medium for that. And what should we do? What if we take a little bit of cool yellow and white, maybe for this? That might be a lot of let's see. Let's put some matte medium down. So we'll take our cool yellow and our white. Oh, that might be a lot. And then we'll take our matte medium, mix this into here. There's a little bit of my purple. I guess I didn't clean this brush very well, so some of that purple is coming off. But let's put a little bit more matte medium. Again, it's always best just to err on the side of caution here, because if it gets if we put something that's too opaque on, unless we wipe it off immediately, we just have to then live with it and work with it. So let's see. That's pretty good. It's pretty subtle. So got now, the thing with the matte medium is it will dry pretty quickly. So I kind of work just like we're doing with like what we would do with Michelangelo with like plaster, kind of in small sections quickly, and then expand outward before that outer edge has kind of dried. Now that I'm, you know, this is very subtle at the moment. I think once we get, I might do a second layer of this, and I think you'll see this will be more visible. Also, yeah, I'm gonna go for these kind of diagonal lines because I see that's what he's done. Although that's not really coming across very well, it's pretty subtle. Okay. You know what, I'm just gonna darken this just a little bit. There we go. Let's see if that makes any difference. Just darken it down just a bit. I know there's probably a lot of people like, this is ridiculous, like going to all this trouble to prep this background. It's all about the hands. Who cares? You could paint this on just a big blue sky and be done with it. And sure, yeah, you could absolutely do that. But, you know, again, I kind of find, like, I think of these as like classes where we get to kind of learn a little bit about an artist's technique and process, and by learning a little bit about, you know, how to layer paint and what happens when we layer paint, I think it oh, okay, that's not a desired outcome. Okay, so let's see if we can adjust this. I should have blow dried that before. Not a big deal, but okay. So now there is a little bit of, I think this is like another cloud that quote unquote man is reclining on here. I think I'm just going to omit that entirely. So let's leave this here. And then in this area, even though we've got this purple, I think I'm going to mix like a gray and put that in the around the hand. And since we've already got our gray that we, or a black that we used for this outline, I can just use a little bit of that with some white. So this one I'm going to have, it's going to be much more transparent. So I'm going to take a little bit of white and a little bit of this gray color that we mixed, or now it's gray, and then just mix a lot of matte medium into it to make it super transparent. So I just want to kind of modify this purple a little bit. And we can paint it all over, or we can just paint a little bit, but there. Now we start getting closer to the original. And I know some people are just going to skip right to this and just be like, well, I don't need to paint that stupid purple layer. I'll just paint this gray right here. And that's totally fine. I think what I see, though, is I can see that gray and I see the purple and all these colors. They kind of come together and they create this like marvelously complex set of colors. And it's just, you know, this is like, I think what real painting's all about. This is the way that the great painters throughout history have worked, and the more that we can kind of connect with them, the more alive I think it makes art in general. So right now that's very subtle. We'll let this dry. In fact, I'll probably hit it with the blow dryer, and then we can maybe put a little bit more yellow, white down in a few, maybe especially down here. We'll see, right? I got distracted with the blow drying because I was reading all of those comments in there. Great conversations and questions and things. It's cool. Sandra was talking about doing the murals that she's been working on for the past while. These, I mean, huge murals, about 5 times the size of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel in Los Angeles, and really cool. She's put a few of them up on the Facebook page. Another reason to join the Facebook page and to check out all the great art that people have been doing. And she's using many of the same techniques that Michelangelo used, which isn't that cool? Like, as much as technology's evolved over the past 546 years, 546 years since he was born, some things still stay the same when it comes to making art. That's that's one thing I love about painting and drawing, is I often feel quite connected to those artists. I don't feel like there's, because the game has remained relatively the same for so long, it's, I don't know, maybe kind of like the way baseball players, you can compare Babe Ruth to Ohtani or, you know, any other, Mike Trout or whatever, because the game has stayed very similar. Same thing with painting. Yes, I'm using paints that weren't available to Michelangelo or Leonardo, but we're still doing pretty much the same thing, right? Okay, so I'm going to put another layer of this yellow on here. Also, that was quite funny. Napoleon mentioned, is he painting yet? We've been on for an hour and I don't know how much work has been done. Oh, I know, I'm just, I get distracted. I mean, I basically just assume that no one's going to be watching any of this stuff, and it just gives me an excuse just to kind of do a lot of reading and research about topics that very few other people care about, and if anybody else finds it interesting, and people can always skip, and people can always tune in, you know, an hour later when the painting is kind of off the ground. It wouldn't bother me the slightest, right? So that's almost like this has gotten a little bit thinner. So I'm just going to carefully get a little bit more white into that paint, just to kind of speed this process up a little bit. Is that a bit more yellow? Oh, I don't know. Now I'm pushing it. Let's see, because this area is a lot more bright. Let's see if I show this here. I'm like, I don't want to have to do 5 layers of this, because there have been times where we make a painting and I spend 2 hours just working on the background until somebody, like, in the chat will be like, are we gonna paint the other part of the picture in today's episode, or is that a, you know, is there gonna be a part 2 to this, because I gotta go soon. So let's do a bit more on top here. Still kind of almost feel like I gotta do another bit right down here. So maybe while that's drying, let's do this side, and then we'll come back and finish that side. So I'm going to put a little bit more of this gray, this darker color, do a little bit more. And maybe I'm just going to, again, the same sort of thing, make it just a little bit darker. A bit more matte medium. That's not bad. It's a little bit darker, but... Like, I think in another pass, I might actually just take almost like another light gray and do kind of some quick streaks over the whole thing, except in a few little places. I think. I don't know, it's just my current thinking about things. Okay. Sometimes that paint, when it starts to dry, it's a little tacky. Anyway, so maybe, yeah, I need to just let this dry. Build this last little bit up. Again, let's make that a bit lighter. Okay, I think that's good for right now. Okay, so now that we've got that done, we will move on to our next step here, which is I want to paint the hands, get some color on the hands, not finish them, because after that we'll go back, we'll do a little bit more work on the background, finish the hands, and then we'll be pretty close to being done. Okay, so to get these hands done, what we want to do is mix what we call like a local color. So the color that is a mid value, right? So we kind of want to mix a color like this. Well, maybe, yeah, I guess, maybe even more like this color. I'm trying to think. It's hard to tell because this is photographed from literally across the room or from below, looking way up at the ceiling. So what do you think he did first? I bet you this is his local color, and then these are highlights, and then this is shadows. So because like what a local color, we would apply that whole color over everything and then do a thinner color over top. And that color, what a weird color that is. I mean, if we really want to paint it like we see it, I mean, you could see that. I mean, can you see this greenish color in there? Like, and then this is there. I mean, you have to remember that this is a section that's maybe about that big. It's intended to be seen from very far away. So no one except Michelangelo and maybe one of his assistants would have ever seen this image as close, even as we're looking at it right now, and even on your computer screen, right? That once the scaffold came down, no one else got up there until every once in a while it was restored, very poorly at times. So all it had to do was to look good from the ground, right? So it's actually remarkable at how well it looks when we zoom in on it, because Michelangelo knew it's not like someone's going to get up here and take a look at it on a ladder every few days, right? So it's almost more like scene painting in a movie, right? It just has to look good on camera. Who cares what it looks like in person? If you've ever been on a movie set, it looks really weird because sometimes the colors are very different than the colors on film. Like, for instance, black and white films. If you see color photographs of black and white film sets, because they still film a few things in color, sometimes like the makeup people's wearing is really weird. Like, it might have like a green makeup on their face, because on camera in black and white it makes them look quote unquote normal, right? Anyway, well, let's just mix something, a brown, and then we'll just we'll figure it out as we paint it, because I'm a little bit I'm not exactly sure what he's done here, so I'm sure we'll figure it out once we get some paint on. So let's take our, in fact, we're gonna need more of this, so I might as well mix more. Some warm yellow, and you know, this would be about like 80% warm yellow, like 10% or less warm red, and about 5% warm blue. Maybe just a little. Let's add another 5% in there. That's still pretty orangey, so I want to put a little bit more blue. And if you do this and you go like, oh, it's turning very greenish, well, it just tells us we need to add a little bit more red into the mixture. Now, he did use a little bit more, so I'm actually going to put a little bit more of that blue in there to take it a bit more on the greenish brown side. Very, very subtle, but okay. And the missing thing is we need a bit of white. So let's just see if we mix this white right here. It's almost still a little bit bright, isn't it? Let's take a bit more blue. Or let me, if I go, need some more white, and to okay, just keep on adding more blue in here. Oh, okay, I think that's getting me much closer. A little bit more white. I think that's, you know, probably close enough, right? And again, we've got this purple down here, so that's also going to come into play. I should just thought about that right now. So I'm going to put a little bit of matte medium in here. Just to help maybe preserve a bit of that purple, because now that I've got it, I'm like, oh, maybe there's a little bit of that kind of stuff going on. I don't know. I got purple here, so let's work with it. There's the edge of my canvas here. That's not bad. You know, the color might look a little bit strange, but remember, this is the mid value, and then we're going to modify with some highlights and shadows on here. Just going to shift down to a smaller brush. Now, you could certainly paint this whatever color you want, like the hand. I mean, if you could paint this like a space alien green if you want, or whatever race you want, you should feel more than welcome to do so. Just as, I gotta check in the chat here. Somebody made wow, there's so many okay, where was it? Like Deborah said there, I might help Michelangelo with his concept of God. For me, God just might be a female hand. Please forgive me, Michael. Which I thought was very funny. It was a comment I read earlier, but I forgot to read out. But yeah, certainly. I mean, here it could be God creating woman, or instead of creating Adam, it could be Eve. It's worth remembering or just noting that. Come on. In fact, let me just finish this. I want to show something, but it's worth noting that this is not the center of the Sistine Chapel. It's very close to the center, but the actual center of the Sistine Chapel is the creation of Eve, which is, you know, a lot, you know, what is going on there? I don't know. It's hard to know exactly. Often artists would make little changes or add things and to try to kind of squeak by the censors, if you want to think of it that way. And is Michelangelo making some kind of commentary about placing the female at the center of the universe as opposed to the male figure? Many people believe Michelangelo to have been gay. So, is there some, like, what's going on? Is there a commentary here, or is it just, I don't know. I always find those things very interesting because, you know, this is an artist who's working on this project for 4 years. And if you're climbing up and down that scaffold every day for 4 years, working on something, your mind is gonna drift and think up all sorts of things. And you know, the Pope and Michelangelo did not see eye to eye about a lot of things in the creation of this painting. So Michelangelo could have been like, okay, you know what, I'm gonna sneak a few little things into this picture here. We'll see if you probably won't. You're such an idiot, you won't even notice anyway. But I don't know. There's a lot of very famous artworks like that that historians think artists were, you know, being a little bit sneaky, I guess. So right now, this color probably looks very weird. People are like, that is blasphemy to paint God's hand in this kind of sickly color. Ooh, yikes. But remember that this is part of the painting process. right? You know, I could imagine, like, just think about Michelangelo. He's on this scaffold painting. He's probably been up there for years, and I think Pascal made a good funny comment in there, like, the thing he hears all the time is like, are you almost done yet, or whatever? Like, no, I'm still working on it. Like the little kids in the backseat, are we there yet? But I can just imagine him painting this and people walking and going like, hey, Mike, the color of your figure seems a little bit weird. Why has everyone kind of got that sickly green color? Michelangelo just like, it's not done. Please, just go away. Let me finish it. Come back in 3 years. Everything will be fine. It's just, this is how paintings are done, people. Leave me alone. I can't keep up with all these there's every time I go and answer a few more, there's more and more. So I'm just going to continue working here, and I apologize if people have been asking questions. The same, I know people have sent me a few emails and I haven't gotten back to them. My publisher sends me emails and I don't get back to them. I only have so much brain power every day, and I apologize. I'm just doing my best to hold it together, like I think a lot of us are, right? So I certainly do not mind if someone asks the same question 10 times until I finally pay attention. It's just, that's especially with the way that the feed works there, is that every time a new question comes, everything gets bumped up, and so sometimes I'm reading a question and it bumps up. I'm sure there's a way to stop that from happening, but so let's get the next color on here. So what would that next color be? And we can go, because now we've painted this sort of color in here. We're going to get darker and certainly going to get much lighter. And I could also see that there could be some people who would have taken a different tact. Some people might have painted this as a foundational color. Some people might have painted a much more kind of pinky, peachy color and then darkened everything around it. All of which are totally legitimate techniques. So, I think I'm going to go darker, and then I'm going to do the highlights probably last. So, darker is not going to be that much that difficult because it's very similar to the color we already mixed. I'm probably going to add a little bit of my darker value into here, and then maybe even just a little bit more warm blue. So let's just see what happens when we do just that. All right, so there's still a little bit of this. I'm also going to use, I think, I'm going to use my glazing fluid for this, because we haven't done any glazing in quite a while with actual glazing fluid. We've been using matte medium to do this. So let's take some of our darker value. That's actually pretty close. I was going to put a little bit more blue in there, warm blue, because we could try to just do this with warm blue. But I think that's probably pretty good. Okay. So we haven't used glazing fluid in a while, because I don't know, the last bunch of paintings haven't needed it. But I'm going to use glazing fluid for this next step instead of matte medium. These two things, while they appear to be very close, and they are closer, you know, they're like Macintosh apples and Gala apples. They're both apples. It's not apples and oranges, but they are still different, right? So matte medium, like I've said many times, is paint without color. It's clear paint. Right, so it's just paint without any pigment, without any powdered pigment. So it's it does a lot of great. We've done essentially a kind of glazing when we did our purple layer, and then we did this yellow layer and this gray layer. We could have done the same thing with glazing fluid, certainly. The reason, but glazing fluid is, again, it's clear. There's a few different properties with glazing fluid. One is that it stays a little bit more wet longer than matte medium. Matte medium tends to dry pretty quickly. Like, that's sometimes almost too quickly for my taste, and when I start getting some, especially, you know, when I'm doing larger areas, I find it can start to kind of smears because it gets sticky. So glazing fluid will stay a little bit wet a little bit longer. It's got like some slow dry properties, right? So I've got slow dry medium, which is just that. It just slows everything down. But it's also, so it's great for kind of blending things, because if you want to apply a glaze and then you want to soften out the edge, a glazing fluid is best for that, right? So let's take our glazing fluid and add it to the mixture here. So we're making it more transparent. And again, glazing is great because you can be as slow or bold as you want. Let's now zoom in. If you go really kind of thin, then you've just got more room to wiggle. Actually, let's go back out here. Okay, so I'm going to take this color that's pretty good. I was going to say it could be darker, but it's always easier to start out with something that's a little bit thinner, and then if you want, you can just sort of brush it out to kind of blend it, right? And then all of a sudden now that hand doesn't look so weirdly orangey brown and kind of like unnaturally colored. And all of a sudden we put this on, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it. Now it's darkening down. That's sort of making some sense, right? Now this area, I think we'll also glaze with a much darker, we could just simply glaze this 5 times to make it darker. But I might even darken the glaze, add more of my dark color in here. But I also want to preserve the different fingers in here, so it's not just one solid silhouetted shape. It's interesting that the shadow is kind of on the top. There's some weird lighting going on here, but it's also because, again, this is we're looking at it from below, so it's almost like we're seeing, how do I really describe I have to think about what I want to say here. I guess what I'm thinking about is just a very complex set of like tasks to make something that looks good on a ceiling is very different than making something that looks good on a wall. Okay, I think that's good. I'm happy with that. So that's my first little pass there. Let's look at God's hand now and just do the same thing. Just got to be careful with this brush that I don't get it outside of here, otherwise, because there's paint on here, right? So I often will just rub any extra paint off. I just want to basically dry it off. And if you do this too much, it's going to get kind of, you know, crunchy here as that paint dries. So I just want to be careful about going too dark or getting the brush too loaded up with wet paint. Okay. Like, especially on this hand, I could have seen doing a totally different color as my foundational layer in here. So I'm kind of going in a little bit of a different... Now that I see them and I've started working on it, I could have seen almost painting the two hands in a slightly different process. I'm pretty confident the way that I'm doing the man's hand, we're on the right track, but I think for the way he did God might have been a little bit different, which is not surprising because he probably painted, I'm sure he would have painted them at different times just because of the fresco process. You know, so he might have painted the hand of man and the whole body of man over a course of a month, and then painted God later afterwards. And maybe, you know, he's got these assistants that are helping him grind pigment, and maybe there's a war and he can't get the right pigment going on. You know, the trade routes are disrupted. Just like today, the supply chains are all messed up, and he's like, ugh, what do you mean? There's no ultramarine blue? Ultramarine blue comes from Afghanistan. Imagine, you know, that it was like more expensive than gold at the time, and so imagine if there's some, you know, there are the people who are bringing the ultramarine blue from Afghanistan, the convoy is attacked or the ship sinks. Michelangelo's like, are you kidding me? I've got half of the painting, half of the ceilings painted, and how am I going to finish this? No ultramarine blue. Okay, well, okay, I got to... These hands are not going to match up. They're going to look like they're different people, that they're completely different races. Like, you know, that's the life of an artist 500 years ago. Now you're just like, oh, I'm out of ultramarine blue. I'll just order some more on Amazon. Tomorrow, boom, it appears, right? That's... somebody like Michelangelo would just be flabbergasted with like how easy artists today have it. Sandra says we should have painted this upside down to really practice. We should, yes, tape the painting onto the ceiling and try to paint. That's great. I love that. Yeah. Lolly's upside down on her scaffold right now making this painting. That's great. Okay, so should we do another layer of a darker color? Maybe, yeah, because that way then we'll do the background and then we'll do the highlights afterwards. So let's take care of some of the darker values. Not that necessarily we're gonna get it all done, but let's just do what we've done. Actually, you know what? I gotta blow dry this because there's still a lot of some shiny wet paint here, so let me mute. I was like noticing Sandra says, I feel like my glaze might be too transparent. I can't really see a difference in my layers. That definitely happens. The one thing is it reminds me of every time, not every time, but sometimes when I make soup, you know, you're like, this doesn't have any taste. It needs some more salt. And you're like, here's a couple of sprinkles of salt. That doesn't do anything. Okay, here's a couple more pinches of salt. I still don't taste it. And mix it in there. I don't like, and you're like, screw this. Pretty much, and then you like stir it up. Oh, goodness, that is, it's like seawater. Holy smokes. Right, so just be careful about, like, sometimes, because it can change really quickly, especially if you get a little impatient, as I'm sure you've seen me do many times, where I'm like, this is not doing anything, and then you go, boo, and then you've made a big change. Okay, so let's see, we could take this same color, and let's just take a little bit more, let's just make it much darker. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of fresh glaze medium in here. Make it a little bit more transparent, and also because it's going to start drying, right? So if it's been sitting here on my palette for a little while, it's going to start drying. So that's pretty dark. But you know what, I'm mixing it because I'm starting to think about some of these darker areas. And in fact, I'm going to switch to a smaller brush anyway. So let's, maybe I'll do this really quickly here. That's kind of nice. There might be one more little bit there to come, but let's just have to be careful of getting too thick of layers. Or too thick of glazing fluid, because then that really jams up your brush. Makes it really dark really quickly. Do the top of these fingers. Okay, so what I was thinking about earlier, and I couldn't quite get the thoughts together, was that, you know, there's some weird lighting things going on in this painting where the light seems to be changing directions, which is kind of strange when we look at it like this. But remember, this is not how he ever intended for it to be seen. He, you know, I'm sure he would have never suspected that 550 years later that people will be looking at this painting on a computer screen somewhere, right? And I think he's trying to simulate the light coming from various different directions when you're looking up at the sky, and I think it's kind of ambiguous as to exactly how these you know, God and man, and what sort of like situation they actually would be in to be flying around in the sky like this. It's pretty subtle, but also, you know, I don't mind it. Worst comes to worse, if after finishing this painting, you can just hang it from like the top outside underneath like your eaves troughs or something, and just be like, it's not intended to look great up close. As long as it looks great from down here, that's all that matters. Right? Or the highest ceiling, you just put it on the ceiling of your bedroom or something, and it's really far away, and it'll look much better from far away. Pretty much guaranteed, right? Okay, let's continue here. And as the brush gets kind of dry, you can almost do a little bit of the blending out with the brush itself, but it might help to. So I'm not doing, remember, this is my second layer of my darker value here. So I'm not doing everything. I'm just going into kind of the darker areas, increasingly moving deeper and deeper into the shadowy parts. I also have to be careful about, once I've put a little bit of this glaze down, I'm just a very impatient painter, and I often, before the glaze is dry, if you start painting onto wet glaze, it sort of wipes the glaze away, and sometimes even the layer of paint beneath it, and is really frustrating. So that's why I often just have to remind, okay, just take a second, get the blow dryer out, use the blow dryer, Michael, otherwise you're gonna be swearing and being all upset. Like, you just gotta, you know, take it a little bit slow, and like, this is a little bit more concentrated here. Not, I didn't do that purposefully, it's just where how I dipped the brush into the medium. So I can just kind of, oops, try to soften that out. So I think I'm gonna leave it there. Then what I'll do is we'll let this dry. We're gonna work on the background here in a second, and then we'll come back to the foreground. Okay, so I want to finish the background off. Any other little things I want to do there, including like little cracks, let's do that now, and then we'll finish off the foreground. So we're going to be a little bit longer, probably another 45 minutes, a little longer than I was expecting to be, probably because I just prattled on and on about different things for a while. Okay. So, let's look at side by side. And think about that. I could do a glaze to try to get some of that streaking color across there. Those streaks, I could go for that. But let's put these cracks on, and I think I'm just going to use this, you know, one of the colors that I've been using for my glazing. Maybe even just the color I just used. Let's just see how that looks on here, because it doesn't seem to be too different. And I don't honestly know if this is a crack or if this is supposed to be like a lightning bolt. Kind of shooting out of the... Although this is God himself, so... you'd think it would be coming from his hand. That looks more like a crack to me. Same sort of thing down here. Now these cracks have long disappeared underneath the paint, so I'm just sort of making them up. You could omit these entirely, certainly. Does seem to kind of add something to this, you know, unexpectedly. I didn't really, I kind of like the way that looks, actually, so. I feel like, should I do one up here even though there's not one there? I don't know. I'm also tempted to almost do the reverse and do a little bit of a lighter kind of almost like a white edge in here. You know what? I'm gonna take this same color, do just a little bit in between a few places. I also think I'd do just a little bit of highlights in a few places too. how's that? Let's see, there's a little. I kind of like the way this looks. I think it definitely added something to it unexpectedly. I just want to be careful I don't completely overdo it. Okay. So the next thing, I'm just going to take a little bit of my darker color. Maybe even just add a little bit more glazing fluid to it. To keep it dark, but also very transparent. So that I can just take this and add just a few little bits of darker, because if this is actually a crack, you know, there's going to be some areas that are going to be darker, right? There's where the light is having a harder time penetrating the surface, you know, down into the recesses of the crack. And also just going to give, again, a little bit more nuance to these cracks. And okay, and then as I said, I want to do the exact opposite here and do a little bit of a white glaze. So just going to take some of my white, a little bit of my glazing fluid. It's really tricky when you add a white glaze, because it's like how much paint and how much glaze is actually there. This is sort of like the edge where there's probably where we've incised with the tool for the transfer process here. That might be all that I need to do there. Kind of like that. I think that's definitely adds a lot. Those cracks. Oh, where'd that drop of water come from? So now, do I want to do? I think I'm just going to quickly. I'm going to do a little bit of a quick glaze and try to get a bit of that, those brush textures going across. I'm just going to blow dry this first, so because I don't want all of this smudging, which would happen if I just did it right now. Okay, let's do a quick little brush across here. How should we do this? I'm almost considering, because I want to see those brush strokes, using a bad brush. I wonder, using a brush that's kind of like, this is a brush I use for gessoing my canvases, right? It's just one of those dollar brushes from Home Depot. What I'm trying to think about is I want to be able to see some of the brush strokes, like potentially even like a toothbrush here, but I think like a old house paint brush might work best. So this paint that I mixed up earlier, my gray, I think could do it. This is going to be pretty subtle effect. I'm going to use matte medium. Let's just put a bit more on here. I'm going to have a rag at the ready just in case things go very, very wrong. Let's get this paint, this matte medium in here. Get more matte medium on here. It's going to be a little bit too didn't want to run out. Okay, so I just mixed this together. I don't know if this is going to work, but always like kind of experimenting and trying. That's one of the things that I like doing with this is I get to play around with all these different techniques. And sometimes I'm happy with the results, and sometimes I'm not. But at least if I tried it, then it's like, oh, okay, that worked out really well. I can use that for another painting for myself, right? Okay, so let's see. If I take this house paint brush, I don't want it to be too wet. I want it to be kind of just like a dry quality. And let's see if I don't know. I might have wanted to be a little bit thinner than this. Actually, I don't know how well that's coming across on camera, but it's actually growing on me. There was a little bit of a panic for a moment there. Again, it's about trying to get this kind of patina of textures on here. I think that's actually pretty good. It's pretty subtle. I have to wait for it to dry, or I'm going to blow dry it. And again, I'm not sure how much it's actually showing up, but So I also just blow dried this a little bit now that it's got some paint on there to make it even a little bit more crusty. There we go. You know, I could see some people being like, yikes, it's definitely not something I'm gonna do. And of course, this is I blow dried this on a paintbrush that if I need to throw this brush out at the end of today, then that's fine, because I might have just ruined this brush with this particular technique here. And it's not there's probably a better way of doing this. Maybe. I don't ever suggested that I'm a know-it-all. So I'm kind of painting like basically with a dry brush. Even though this is it's sort of maybe the opposite of the way he did it, but I think it looks like kind of a pretty wet brush to get all those strokes. But it does, again, it complicates the surface, and especially when you have something really simple. Like one of the paintings that I want to do is a little bit of a bonus, is a Rothko painting. And this is like Rothko would be building up a surface in a similar way, like a lot of layers that, you know, the final painting might be green, but there might be 10 layers of orange, different kinds of oranges, and maybe just the final layer is green. You're like, well, why not just paint green there? Well, because all of those oranges are kind of complicate that green color at the very end. Okay, let that sit there. Okay. Let's see how well we did just in terms of side by side. I mean, I honestly, now that I look at it, I could do even more of that. But that's, I think, good enough for government work, as my grandfather used to say. It's probably one of my favorite quotes of all time. I remember as like maybe 8 years old, him and I were building shelves just like I built here in my studio. You know, and if things weren't quite straight or level, he's like, good enough for government work. And I was at the time like, what? What does that mean, Grandpa? Oh, one day you'll know. Okay. So, let's now go to our next step here. So now we're going to paint the hands, and we're going to basically start getting closer to wrapping up today's painting. So we're going to now put some highlights on the hands, and then we're going to put the darkest shadows on the hands. So let's just take a look here. This color is it's much peachier color. You know, it might even, as I'm thinking about it right now, there's two things I think we want to think about. Like, do we want to make this painting look like the original, which might make it look a little bit weird, to be honest. If we paint this like exactly the way it is, it might look a little bit weird just on its own. Or do we want to try to make this look normal, right? Which would mean, because some of these, you know, again, these kind of highlights on here, you know, work when this painting is on the ceiling 3 floors away versus when it's up close. I think I'm going to go for more of what Michelangelo did, and rather than trying to think of this as like an actual painting, learning how to paint hands, trying to recreate a little bit closer to the original, and I think that it'll come across just fine. Just thinking out loud. Let's get some more warm yellow. Let's do this right in this. Oh, it was a lot of color. I didn't need so much. Let's just move that a bit off to the side. Okay, so let's take our warm yellow and warm red. Oops, sorry. Okay, I just need to close that app. I love that Sandra's saying, when I first started, all my earlier stuff is pretty rough. I'm talking about her Instagram account and all the work she was doing. That's great. I think it's always important to know that we always have to start somewhere. We often don't remember starting. We don't remember what those first few years are like when we're first learning how to walk, right? We don't remember how frustrating that experience was, right? Our brains purposefully trick us into forgetting what that was like because it was so difficult and traumatic, right? So let's take some white. I might get a little bit of this purple in here, which will be, we'll see how that what happens there. Hopefully it's dry enough. Okay, so what I'm looking for is this color actually a little bit more on the reddish, peachy side. So I'm going to take a bit more of my warm red. And just like we've been glazing with a lighter or darker color, getting darker and darker, I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to start with something that's a little bit lighter, or kind of not quite too much lighter than this, and then we're going to build up. Like already that's pretty aggressively, I don't think it shows up on camera just yet, but so I'm going to start here because this is, yeah, let's start with this. I already think this might be quite the shock, so get my glazing fluid in, my matte or satin glazing fluid, and also there's a little bit too much on my brush, so I'm just going to get some of that off. If you have a lot of glazing fluid on your brush, it can make the blending process tricky, and I want to have a clean brush that's not wet either. So let's zoom. Right, there's the edge of the canvas. So let's just start painting with this. Right, and oh, now the color's coming back into the hand. It's not so sickly and pale, and look at that. Very subtle. And again, I'm not sure how much is coming across on camera. Again, I want to be careful not to paint everything. Wow, what a difference. And I want to leave some of that initial layer there to come through. So that's pretty subtle. We're going to do that maybe 3 times in total. So now let's just come over to God's hand here and do the same thing. Of course, again, if you want to put colored fingernails on here, or a bracelet, or a watch, or I don't know, whatever you want in here, you should feel welcome to do that. You want to change the gender, the race, whatever you want. This is one of the most famous images in art history, which has had plenty of, it's been memed and appropriated and ridiculed and embraced, and you should feel, again, welcome to add your own spin to it if you like, as I'm sure there's probably a few of you doing just that. So that looks, you're probably like, I don't even really see much of a change. That's fine, right? Almost, that can be kind of a good thing. Just that subtle dialing of putting a little bit more of this warm kind of pinkish color back onto here. So that was a great first little step. I see quite a change. It feels like all of a sudden it's coming to life. Like they looked pretty dead, which is hard. I think for a beginner I think it's hard for me to even remember what it was like to be a beginner, to try to, because it's almost like chess. You have to think like 5 steps ahead. And I love playing chess, but I can think maybe 1 step ahead. I can do this move and the next move, and then beyond that, I'm not Kasparov or anyone else, Bobby Fischer. I'm not able to think that many steps ahead, so it's trickier for someone like me. But when it comes to painting, you kind of have to, especially more complex paintings, learn to kind of think a little bit ahead, and that only really comes from doing more and more painting. You get more and more confident that you can kind of see a little bit further, thinking of all the future steps that need to be done. So here's a little bit more white. I just took some of that color, but I'm mixing it off to the side here, lightening it up even further. Again, we'll put our glazing fluid in here. Don't think I need quite so much of it, but I'm going to blow dry all of this, because otherwise, if I try to paint this glaze on top of this glaze, I run the risk of just wiping this off, and then that adds another 10 minutes of me trying to fix those things, which you've seen me do in the past. Because sometimes, especially towards the end of the painting, I get impatient, right? Okay, let's continue this. Now I got a much lighter. Right, almost have to just be careful about going too far. Notice how I'm sort of doing one little area at a time. I've learned my lesson over the years that if I try to just put all that paint, I'll put all those blobs of paint, and then I'm gonna come back and blend them out. By the time you get down here, this one is dry, and now you got a big shape there of paint that you gotta kind of deal with, so. So you can see I might be able to get away with just one more layer of this, and then might be done that hand. Let's move. I still want to do a little bit more darkening, but okay. So there's a lot more highlights on God's hand here. Isn't that kind of neat how all of a sudden it just starts to kind of come together? Now we get a step like this in. If you're working on this painting, you're doing sort of similar things to what I am, you should be able to see. All of a sudden, it does feel like it's kind of coming to life a little bit. The one thing you notice is if you put a little bit of this color over a dark area, like I did here, all of a sudden it lightens that up quite dramatically. So that's why I have to come back and kind of darken that down again. Same sort of thing in here. So it does, there's a bit of a difference between those little areas. So. Okay, I've got to be careful. Okay, let's blow dry this. And then do it again, because otherwise some of that's gonna come right off. Okay. I see a question from Pascal there. Says, is that a mop brush? I do have a mop brush. Actually, I've got a bunch of them. This is the mop brush I've used many, many times. This is what a mop brush looks like when it's brand new, so you can see what happens to them over time. But I often, these days, will just use just another brush, because you can. I don't know why. Sometimes I like, especially, you know, these are, it's really nice to have if you're doing a larger area, to have a mop brush that is really fanned out like that. Or sometimes if I'm doing small details, it can be pretty hard to control a mop brush when it's really, you know, again, you can still use it like this. Mop brushes are at least initially are used more for watercolor artists to like mop big areas of a painting with a lot of color, but they certainly work really well for blending. Okay, let's I want to ideally finish off the highlights here on this next round and then do my shadows up next. So let's see how much I can do here. Okay, let's take, I think I could still probably get away with this. Maybe let's just take a bit more white. To show you a different angle of this process too. Where's here? So it's just sort of just kind of stamping it out a little bit. Okay, let's go to this other hand here. Also, Michelangelo, especially during his time, was probably the greatest anatomist. You know, Leonardo is often thought of as being, because he actually dissected corpses, as being like the father of modern anatomy, which is probably arguably true, but Michelangelo really put it into practice maybe more than Leonardo did. Michelangelo is very famous for all of his figurative paintings, like the Sistine Chapel here, but also obviously being a sculptor, you really got to know your anatomy. If you're going to make a sculpture like David, you've got to be on top of things. Okay, I think I want to, I'm going to blow dry this, and then I'm going to do one last little bit of like much brighter white here. See in the chat, Carol says, the order of highlighting is making sense now. I'm getting it. Awesome. That's cool. Let's put a bit more of this white. I'm just going to mix it right in here. Let's just go all in. Maybe let's take even more white. Let's just push the limit here. Why not? We're getting close to the end, and so there's much less fluid in there. Let's go right back to this hand, because I think we got more highlights. Man, I could even go even higher than that. Okay, do it maybe just a little bit more here, and then we'll move on to the shadows and finish those off. Okay, so that's, I think I'm just going to end the highlighting here, and let's go into the darkest areas now, because I like kind of start, this is just the way that I work. I like kind of starting from the middle and then branching outwards and going darker and lighter. I know there's other people, other teachers, I had other teachers who would say, go to the extremes first. Go to your darkest dark paint, your darkest shadow paint, your darkest highlight. And I think I've talked about this before. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, again, I had teachers they insisted that's how it had to be done. And it makes sense. It's just not the way that I like to paint. So it's just personal preference, and nothing wrong with having a personal preference, right? So I'm going to take my glazing fluid and let's take my darkest color, mix this in here. I want to take a bit of what, you know, just some of the darker value I had in here, just to keep it so it's, I don't want to just go black, but I want to, because I want to still have preserve some of these, that color. That's pretty dark, but we do want to push the values. The stronger the value contrasts are, the more depth we're going to have in this picture. So I'm just going to wipe some of it off because it's hard to blend with a lot of paint on here. And then let's just go right into darker areas. I'm going to go even darker in a second, but let's just come back over here. Well, let's blow dry that, and then I'm going to go much, much darker. Okay. I'm going to take even more of my darker color. Mix this into my glazing fluid. And I'm going to use a smaller brush as well. you know, he's got a much better, more subtle use of these values than I have. But, you know, I mean, he's one of the greatest, you know, if not, you know, one of, you know, maybe the greatest, maybe one of the top 5 greatest artists who ever lived, right? So just temper our expectations for what we're going to be able to do here. And the fact that he did this when he was a sculptor and he blew all the painters' minds is just like a ridiculous display of like ability. See, there's, I don't know what happened. That must not have been dry. So let that dry, and I'll just work around it. Yikes, that's a big blob. So sometimes I get pretty impatient at this stage of a painting, and I just start kind of blobbing paint on here, and it just doesn't serve me well. The level of like attention to detail that he has, maybe this is only like for the anatomy and for light and shadow. Maybe that's why he did such a great, being a sculptor, he was able to really notice some of those things that maybe a painter might not have picked up on. Right, like I'm just sort of like it's okay. I am going to outline everything again, and that's going to help bring some, you know, definition back into here. But let me see, darkening. It's a bit too dark. Actually, not too bad. Not too bad. Okay, so I think I'm just going to start finishing it out by doing some outlining here, I think. Oops. So let's talk about our finishing touches here, because I just want to do a little bit of the outlining, and then we're going to do our side-by-side comparison and wrap up here. Okay, so the next step, I think I'll probably just use the darker color that I've been using so far for doing some of the glazing. I've already been doing a little bit of the outlining. You could use like a Posca pen or something to do this, but I think it kind of makes sense just to use this same color again. Also, as you just see, like if I got a bit of that glazing fluid in there, if I make a mistake, it's pretty easy just to wipe it off in a way that is maybe a little bit more difficult if we were just painting with paint right out of the tube. You know, even just noticing I just did this, like look how much more nuanced that line on the top of that wrist is than what I've done here. Also just good practicing some very narrow brushwork. Looking for that joint, that knuckle. One of my lights in the studio just went out. Let me see what's happened there. I think we can control our lights with an app on the phone. I think my wife just accidentally turned one of them off. Not that I mind, it's kind of funny. I'm actually very surprised that it hasn't happened many times already. You know, I can see, like, my outlines are nowhere near as subtle as Michelangelo's. And he's painting on his back on a scaffold 50 feet up into the air. It's kind of depressing to think about sometimes how much better some of those great artists are. But you know, it certainly also gives me just a renewed respect for what he was able to accomplish. One thing with like hands is to kind of, you know, keep them nice and organic with lines going up and down like waves. If everything is just straight lines, it looks too rigid and mechanical. You gotta like get all those little bumps, and even if you make some up, it doesn't matter if you get the anatomy exactly right. Some of these lines are pretty thick. That's okay. Again, I'm gonna hang this picture at the highest place in the house, and it'll look great from far away. And you don't have to do this kind of outlining at all. I think you might find it kind of helpful because it can sort of help resolve some things. I probably could have gone for a much less opaque, darker, or lighter, not quite as dark and opaque of a line. Especially now that I see this, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of heavy-handed. If you will excuse the pun. I mean, even just drawing this pinky finger like this. This pinky finger is in foreshortened, so it's kind of coming towards us. That's a pretty tricky thing to draw. I mean, I'm not surprised that he pulled it off, but it's also just kind of amazing. Okay, let's just see. I am almost tempted to put more highlights on. Like, I can feel like you can see like I did too many highlights. This is too bright. I probably should have kept a little bit more of my original color down here, because now it's sort of competing in terms of space with this finger, right? We want this to be, these fingers to look like they're further behind this thumb, and since I've treated them the same, they seem to kind of occupy the same space. So that's a little bit of a something kind of not super happy with. I'm gonna do a little bit more back and get a bit more highlight here. This is sort of like one of the things that you know, Thomas Kincaid would say is like, you can never add too much white when you're doing your highlights. Just keep on painting more and more and more white to kind of get the real brights to pop. And I can kind of see that here, right? We can keep on lightening some of these highlights. Kind of pushing my luck here, as I'm discovering right now. Doing this without having blow dried this dark color is like, but because that dark color is not dry yet. So even just a little bit of that, even bringing more highlights onto the top is going to, you know, if I just leave this alone and stop messing with it, is going to help pull this further up and push those fingers just a little bit further behind. Like, we could continue doing this exact thing that I'm doing right here for quite a while, and it'll only get better. Well, it's possibly could push it too far. Like, maybe it's, I don't know. I think maybe it's just like, I feel like that's better, and then this, you know, you kind of go back and forth. But I think that that might be good. So, often when once I sign these things, it kind of is like, just tells my brain, okay, Michael, time to move on. What's the date today? The 5th. Okay, so let's talk about our side-by-side comparison, and we'll see how they look and how they compare side by side. If you liked today's episode, you felt it was good enough to want to watch another one of these, I strongly encourage you to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Today's a bonus episode, so if you're watching me for the first time, I'm usually here on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 4 p.m. Pacific time here on the west coast of North America, and this isn't on the screen, right? So, you know, I want you to take a photograph of what you've done, put it on your social media, put it out there into the world, and particularly join our Facebook group. The link is in the description below. Next week at the same time, we're going to look at all the great art you've made. As well, if you want to make a donation, here's a couple of ways that you can do it. And I just saw Carol. Look at that. Wow. Huge donation. That is awesome. I love you guys. You're so awesome. What an awesome group of people. So thank you so much for everyone for all of your support over the years. This is so cool. Thank you, Carol. Let's take a look at these side by side. It looks, I think, you know, there's that kind of darker color that I put down there. I think it could have still been even a little bit. Remember, I was kind of wanting to add maybe a little bit more, a little bit more on the bluer, greener side. I think I could have done even more of that. I also do think in here I could have gone even a little bit more pink and a little bit, because this has gotten pretty white. So while I've got a pretty good contrast, I don't quite have the subtlety that he was able to capture in his painting, which is kind of sad considering he was painting above his head on a scaffold, whereas I'm painting here in the comfort of my studio. But you know, it is what it is. Let's just take a quick zoom in on and look at a little bit more of the detail. You know, oddly enough, like as I get a little bit closer, I'm like, yeah, maybe not so bad. Maybe mine it shouldn't be on the ceiling. It should be a little bit closer, but it is what it is, right? Yeah, like one thing you can really see he's captured like the actual, like a pretty muscular hand. Like mine, I'm not very muscular at all, so everything's just sort of big round. But you know, these kind of bony shapes, like that's a master anatomist that is able to kind of get those things just exactly precise. Like that just shows such a keen eye towards detail, whereas mine seems much more generic. Let's look at this hand. I think in retrospect, maybe I really do think that he painted these at different times and with different colors, because I really think there was maybe a lot more of that pink color as my initial value, but not bad. Right, not too bad. Okay, maybe do I need to just do I need to just take a little bit? Okay, better just okay, just now that I've got that, I can touch that. Michael, just walk away. My goodness. Michael, what are you doing? I don't know if that was a good idea. But I wouldn't be the first artist to relentlessly play with the canvas. Okay, so thank you everyone for painting along with me today. I know there's so many comments in the chat that I didn't get to, but I always read them afterwards later on, so hopefully there's no questions there that I forgot to ask. Remember, I said just keep on asking until I notice it. This was great. I'm really excited to have been able to spend a little bit of time celebrating my hero. I was named after Michelangelo. My middle name's David, after David's wonderful sculpture. Yeah, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you guys again very, very soon. Good night, everybody.